Hi, welcome. My name is Eleanor. I'm on day 7 of the Seeley Challenge, and today I read a book called Like by A.E. Stallings. I heard about it on the same podcast episode that I mentioned in my previous video. They had mentioned Josh Charles being a finalist in the 2019 Pulitzer, and Josh Charles was a finalist with A.E. Stallings for this book. So I thought I'd give it a go. In that episode, the two podcasters whose names I've forgotten, unfortunately, but the link is there, they didn't seem to like A.E. Stallings and they mocked her. And so I was even more motivated to read the book to see for myself. There's something that happens with poets who rhyme, and also poets who are, as she is, she's a classicist, so she studied classics. She works, I think, all the time in classic forms, like a villanelle or a sonnet or sestina, such. She knows how to use meter. She's studied meter, she studied rhyme, she uses it all the time. Loves it. There's something about that in this, in 2022, a lot of people mock that. A lot of people mock a lot of things in poetry. You don't have to look very far to find that. But in this case, I really think that the mockery is misplaced. And I think what might have happened is that those podcasters, I'm imagining, didn't actually read her book to the end. It's a longer book than usual. And it starts off, I found, a little rocky. The rhymes made me kind of laugh out loud a couple of times. And also the subject matter added to the somewhat childish feel of the poems at the very beginning of the book. She talks about, her children. She has 2 children. She talks about, for example, them getting lice, or she talks about what it's like to have a daughter who uses glitter with, in craft activities, and you can't get rid of the glitter. And there's always something loftier that she's talking about in the book. There's always something loftier that she's talking about in these poems by the end of the poem, but generally it's hard to get to the end of the poem because you sort of feel like, is she being serious about this? There's a prejudice against rhyme. Well, around halfway through the book and moving on, she ramps it up. And if you want to see a rhyme being used spectacularly, while meter is being used, while forms are being adapted and adopted in a perfect way for subject matter, this is the book for you. If you perhaps are new to poetry but think you wouldn't mind something that sounds traditional, I'd really go for this. I think you'd love it. Also, if you are a student of poetry or, a poet yourself, this is an excellent, it's almost like a sampler of what can be done with meter and rhyme. And I found actually that there were a few poems in there that were very helpful to me. I'm a real poetry geek, so I like to really look at the meter and try to figure it out for myself, to kind of test myself, to scan the poetic line. And I'm also always going back to this book, which I would highly recommend. This was recommended to me by my teacher, Josh Mehigan, when I did a workshop with him through Brooklyn Poets. And interestingly enough, it's actually an Aussie author, James McAuley. It's a tiny little book called Versification, A Short Introduction. Now, there's a lot of other books about the use of meter, And he said actually that they almost all get it wrong, except for this book, which gets it 100% right. And if anyone knows anything about meter, it's Joshua Mehigan, who he himself is a poet and an excellent teacher. And there's a chapter on metrical variation, and I hadn't quite understood the first 2 pages of it. But when I read this particular poem, and I'll get it here, in this book by A.E. Stallings, the poem is called Silence. The first 2 lines hit me, and I thought, oh my God, this is what this chapter on metrical variation is discussing. These are the first 2 lines. I'll go like this at the end of the first line. So, okay. Silence has its own notation. Dark jottings of duration, but not pitch. So what A.E. Stallings is doing here is she's got trochees working. Silence has its own notation. And then there's that last, what we call masculine ending, dark. And I hadn't understood that. It was being described in this book, but I hadn't understood it until I saw this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is it. Now, if you're watching this and you actually know more about meter than I do, which is highly likely, and I've gotten it wrong, pop it in a comment for me. But I'm really excited about this. I'm a poetry geek. Okay, back to A.E. Stallings, back to the book. Okay. The titles are in alphabetical order, which is a lot of fun. So she just the poems are in the order of the alphabet. Whatever she called it, she puts it in. It's almost like an index, but the contents looks like an index of the titles. The subject matter varies. As I said, there's a little bit about being a mother, about having children. There's quite a bit about her life in Athens. She's been living in Greece for quite a while, even though she's American. There's a little bit about the refugees drowning, trying to get to Greece, which I didn't feel they were her most effective poems, but there is that. I found that the most exciting poems are when she's honing in on one subject, whether it be a pencil, whether it be an animal in her garden, whether it be silence, as in the poem I quoted from before. And I feel that for me, I prefer shorter poems, so I just gravitate towards her shorter poems. There are longer poems. There's quite a bit of reference to the classics. I didn't feel that it was excessive. I don't really know much about, Homer, but, I got it. There are words she uses that I never heard of before. And I really actually want to make at some point a list of the new words I've discovered through her. Some beautiful, I love collecting words, and she's the one to go to if you're a word collector. Every once in a while she comes up with an absolute beauty. I would recommend, I'll link to her website, because she has a link to an article too that she wrote about rhyme, which I think is great. She writes about the prejudice against rhyme, and she said something so interesting. She says rhyme is a kind of metaphor, a likeness between unlikes. And that's really, when it comes down to it, that's what rhyme is. And I absolutely love that. So that's it for tonight. Another win, an absolute win. Yeah. Why don't I read? I don't have time to write it out, but I'll read Silence all the way through. Silence has its own notation, dark jottings of duration, but not pitch, a long black box or little feathered hitch, like a new Greek letter or diacritical mark. Silence is a function of time, the lark in flight but not in song, a nothing which keeps secrets or confesses, pregnant, rich, or awkward, cold, the pause that makes us hark the space before or after. It's the room in which melody moves, the medium through which thought travels. It is golden, best. Welcome relief to talk-worn tedium. Before the word itself, it was the womb. It has a measure. Music calls it rest. Now, if that isn't a perfect sonnet, my name isn't Eleanor. And the only real property is not the property of the mind. Okay? I wish you a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.